welcome to anyone who will be joining us. I'm very, very excited about this webinar. We will be speaking with two distinguished TA professionals about what is going on in the TA world in terms of skill-based talent practices, skill-based hiring. And the title is Navigating a Hiring Freeze. So navigating these current uncertain times. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests. Andrea, you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself. You'll do it better than me.
Thanks, Yusuf. Thanks for having me, and thanks. Good to see Chris again. I'm Andrea. I'm a principal talent acquisition partner. I've been in the talent acquisition game for over 13 years now, both in consulting, that's my background, and then around 8 years ago, I shifted internally, and I've been with two of the bigger corporations here in Berlin. My role is somehow in between day-to-day operational recruitment, so you're hiring your 360 recruitment piece of work, and then a lot of strategic activities, huge projects. I had the opportunity to be part and to lead a project for global expansion to Southeast Asia, which is fantastic, and win 2 innovation projects, which I'm really proud of, as you can tell. And my role is quite unique, which is good and bad at the same time, because principles are not as common in talent acquisition. So that will be about my professional background. I'm a true Berlin lover, so I'm lucky to be here. And again, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, you're also a TA Crunch founder. I'm very surprised you didn't mention that, but this is kind of how I got to know you through other things as well.
Correct. That's yes, you're absolutely correct. That's something we started out of passion, right? The TA Crunch is the Berlin talent acquisition community, or I would like for it to become the community. Definitely is doing really well, and it has people all excited about the events we have been organizing, and I'm really grateful for that. That is, again, it's a passion project, and I think that's why when I'm in conversations, I never think of it as professional. So I'm really grateful for you to bring it up, because I need to make sure it gets included in this.
Start including it. I mean, I thought about it because I attended some of these events, and they are definitely very, very useful, bringing people together, speaking to each other. And this is kind of what we're doing at Codility as well, right? So I do appreciate that. Christiana.
100%.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chris. Funny enough, I worked with Andrea before at Zalando, so we know each other for many years. I'm a former talent acquisition lead, so I just left recently Zalando. But over the last 1.5 years, I have been dedicating myself into the leadership role, which was something new for me. So I like to say that I'm a tech recruiter by heart. So if leadership doesn't go as planned, I always have tech recruitment to come back, which I absolutely love. But over the last 1.5 years, I had the chance as well to be very close to commercial roles. So it opened up a world for me to understand like how recruitment works in different areas, what are the challenges. And I would say, like, when we are passionate about one thing, we usually only think about that. So that opened up the world for me for new challenges and new opportunities. So as a lead, of course, challenges are a little bit different when it comes to individual contributor. And I think mainly they are related to managing a group of people into, let's say, one direction. Many times challenging, I would say, other times very pleasant, because you get to learn a lot of different things with them. But as well, working very closely with VPs, SVPs in strategy hiring, which I particularly love. And as well, diving deep into topics like this one that we will have today, or D&I, or just simply getting into topics that you might not be so used to, like hiring freezes, as we will speak about, or diving deep into internal mobility and others. So we are, let's say, on the front of it's our face that is there, let's say, to build a strategy, and then our teams are helping and as well executing.
All right, and we will definitely get into some of these projects and the ideas that you guys have been working on. But I have to say, as a tech recruiter, I guess you know Codility very well. Myself, as a tech recruiter, I've used Codility as a client, and I ended up joining, and I've been here for about a month. Yeah, I'm moderating this webinar, hopefully creating nice and insightful conversations around these topics. If you don't know Codility, we are the #1 rated technical hiring platform, at least in Europe. And we unlock the world's engineering potential. So we enable engineering teams to make accurate and fair hiring decisions efficiently. And what we have been working on quite a lot in the few last months is to break down some of the tasks that we offer our clients, and make sure that we also have those tasks broken down in terms of skills. So we are definitely also at the forefront of skill-based practices, and uses skills not only to hire more effectively, but also to think about reskilling and upskilling in terms of learning and development when the person has already joined the team. So this is why we are very excited to talk about these topics, and let's dive right into it. So my first question would be, how do skill-based talent practices differ from what we've known so far, which are kind of role-based practices or conventional ones? What are the differences? Who wants to take this one?
Yeah, I can go first. I think what we have noticing in the workspace is that a lot of us have been hiring based on CVs, right? We look at experience, and then based on that, you say yes or no to a talent. And the reality is that many times we are not looking into skills, but we are actually looking into the experience or the education of someone. And based on that, you are making decisions about this person being a fit or not to the company. But quickly, we started to realize that often then we actually look for skills, right, in our daily job. So in a daily job, it doesn't matter what title you have, if you are a talent acquisition partner or something else. What you really need is to look at what are the exact skills that particular role needs. And I think that's what has been very challenging for companies that have like a more traditional way of looking into talent, is that they were struggling to understand why they had to, let's say, reject thousands of CVs, and then they would see that, let's say, great talent they have been rejecting going to roles that probably they have been rejected in their companies, right? So this is basically what I have been noticing a lot. And with the change of the world, with this need of more flexibility, more agility, with the current setup that we are having, we don't have as much money as we used to have, right? The companies are lacking a lot of profit. Probably we won't be able to hire as we were hiring before, and I think somehow this is a good thing that happened to us, is that right now we have to actually deep dive into these topics, right? And look at talent in a completely different way. Andrea, I don't know if you want to add something.
No more hyper growth, right? So it's a complete shift from where we were 1 year,
Absolutely.
2 years ago, right? Why do you think this is a essential shift for organizations? Do you have anything to add, Andrea?
I was thinking when I was listening to Chris, who made some really strong points. I recently read something about how you can assess some soft skills as well through case studies, but like real scenarios that you discuss with an individual, a real scenario, and you would interact with them in the interview, seeing how they would solve that particular problem. And this one was specifically about critical thinking, But on the side note, to come back to your question, Yusuf, I think it is essential that we shift, or we go as far away as possible from having that biased approach, because I think it was quite biased. Without having skill-based hiring, we are often trapped into this halo bias, right? Halo effect, seeing blue chip companies on the CVs and instantly assuming that the individual comes with a pedigree. I literally despise this term, pedigree, for an individual. And I think being really mindful of the way we do interview and being mindful to check for the competencies or the skills to match our expectations, it will also help us tremendously to move away from being sometimes really biased when it comes to how many years they spent in a role, what companies do they come from, what universities or what degrees do they come with. So I believe it is a necessary shift to also enable us to be better at diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you kind of connected the dots there also with. So Chris, you mentioned the fact that we're going through some hiring freezes. We don't have the budgets that we used to have before. Is this going to stay this way in your opinion, in terms of like this skill-based thinking and approaches, or is this just a kind of something that we're trying to do because we are navigating these uncertain times?
I mean, I really hope it stays, to be honest, because I totally agree with what Andreas said. This pedigree thing is like it's old. As I say, it stinks, you know. I think, like, of course, a lot of people are investing a lot in their studies, which is great. Having a good base is probably a great thing, right? Because you are studying, you are learning, but that's not all, right? And I hope it stays because, you know, I experienced this in my previous company where, for example, we had hiring freezes and recruiters were not able to do the job that they used to do, right? And many of them went to support other business units. So what happens here is that they have, of course, skills that are not only related to, let's say, the recruiter as such, right? So actually, we can do sales, we can do so many things because we do have skill set, which allows us to move internally. And it was really good to see that those people were not only interested in moving within the area of human resources, let's say, but some of them moved like outside of those areas. And this is because, you know, we are looking at skills and not only at experience. Otherwise, recruiters would stay where they are and waiting for a role to come in. So, you know, I really hope it stays. And I really hope there is a shift of minds. But honestly speaking, I think this is a big cultural change, which, as we know, like changing the culture of a company is probably one of the most difficult things we can do. So I know that for many, many years, we will have companies who are not really understanding this. And of course, we have to look, and as I work with so many stakeholders that were really struggling to hire, we have to put ourselves in their shoes as well. And how many times we have like that talent that we are losing in the next 3 months that carries this very unique skill that we really need to hire, and they want to hire fast. And we are telling them, hey, let's move to skill-based hiring. And let's, like, of course, like, it's frustration that will come out of this. So it needs to come like from a big shift in terms of culture. And I'm not sure if this is something that everyone is ready to adapt to. And let's not forget, it's expensive as well. Identifying this type of skills, having experts who can actually deep dive into this, plus maybe hiring an external company or having people in the company who can do this job, is already a shift, and it's costly, right? So it might take some time, but I really hope it stays.
All right. Just on the Q&A, guys, for those of you who are listening to us, you can put your questions in the Q&A, and we will dive into that in about 15 minutes. We have some prepared questions or topics to discuss, and then we can dive into the Q&A afterwards. So I would like to get into. So we mentioned the importance of shifting towards this. You mentioned also the difficulty of changing culture, trying to adapt to this new world. What list of benefits, or what specific benefits do you think organizations can expect to gain from adopting these skills-based practices? So let's say, this hiring manager you mentioned, how do you convince them to do this? What are the benefits for the hiring manager, for the company? Andrea, maybe you can start, and then Chris can add to it.
Sure. I think I would look at it from two perspectives. So one is external hiring and one is internal. I will not approach at the internal piece, because I think I wanted to connect to something Chris mentioned earlier, but I guess we will have some time to dive a bit into that later. On the external hiring piece, I would say that the main benefits, I have to go back to what I mentioned before, is elimination of biases in our recruitment processes. So I think that would be one of the, let's say, bigger benefits that we would gain, which in turn means that we will have an equitable process for everyone coming through, which in turn means that we assess individuals based on a skill set. Therefore, when they are inside the organization, we will know precisely, or with quite a small margin of error, where they stand. Otherwise, in comparison to what may happen, is we believe in the pedigree, and therefore we may be blinded by these things, hiring individuals, but the skill set, if we were to put it, how much do you match skill X on a scale from 1 to 10? We may believe it's a 7, and actually it may be proven to us it's actually around a 3. So being equitable, I think, leads to better hiring decisions, which in turn leads to having quite a stable performance from multiple individuals in the same type of role. That's the one thing that comes to my mind. The second thing that I observed with this skill-based hiring, and oftentimes, to be honest, in technology, we are not that bad at it, right? We have, especially when it comes to programming, we have platforms like Odility, and even if companies develop their own testing to try and ensure that this is the case. But I understand that maybe outside of technology or in other areas of tech, it's a bit more complicated. So other things that definitely help is understanding, if we look at outside hiring, another benefit for the hiring managers is the ease. So developing, let's say, ways to assess skills, it's kind of like replicating it, right? So it is efficient, it can be fast, it can be transparent, avoiding these, when we have a lot of behavioral discussions, a lot of behavioral interviews, right? They are, you can interpret an answer. If I hear the answer, I might find it this way. If somebody else hears the answer, might find it the other way. With skill-based hiring, if we make things quite simple and we follow, let's say, a blueprint, then it is, you know what you get, right? Mm-hmm. So it's predictable. I would say these are the two big benefits that come to my mind. Chris, if anything comes to your mind.
Mm-hmm. I may be thinking about the perspective of internal mobility, because this has been a very dear topic to me. I have noticed that there is always this bias about the title, right? And many hiring managers have a big struggle in looking for talent outside of their areas, especially areas that are very niche, because they truly believe that no one in the company have the skill set needed, so they do not attract talent internally. And I think for me, this was like the number one mistake of these niche areas, was to really completely disbelieve in talent internally. So this was a work that I did with a few areas which I was working on this year, was to look at internal talent on a skill-based on a skill-based. And then, you know, like I had this discussion with them asking how many people left your area to work in other different areas of Zalando. And, you know, there was this big list of people who shifted. And then I asked the question, okay, but why cannot these people, let's say on the organization, be moved into your area? And I think there was a lot of fear and a lot of disbelief that someone would have these skills, but in fact, they were already moving, but just one way, because we were not foresting the internal mobility strategy in these niche departments. And the reality is, as soon as we started doing it, and I think it was really important to change our job ads internally, because I don't know why, but we have this tendency of, oh, if we are going to write internal job ad, we just copy paste the external one, we put it as the internal one, and that's it, and we move on. And
I am guilty of this many times.
Maybe yours is really great and we can use it for both internal and external. But the reality is that many times there are things that you can say in internal job ads that probably, you know, in terms of tools, in terms of like internal things that we are using, in terms of that skill set, actually saying, hey, if you ever work with team XYZ and you collaborated with this or that department, you know, like you might actually have a very similar profile of what we are looking for. And, you know, hiring managers, it took them a while because we need to ask them to do this. You know, we need to work with them in writing an additional thing. And I think, of course, recruiters are looking at me and saying, Chris, I already asked this person to, you know, meet me for 20 minutes plus writing this, plus we wrote the sourcing strategy plus this, and you are asking me for an additional different internal job ad. And I always tell them that this is actually not only for their benefit, it's for ours, right? Because you get to know inside out everything that happens inside of your company. So for me, it really helped me to look at more skill-based internally when we started to write different job ads, when we started to look deeper into engineering team A, engineering team B. Okay, these B needs security specialists, right? And these security specialists have this very interesting skill set that is needed for the job. But then we went to ask to these engineers, and almost all of them were doing security by design. So they knew how to do it. But we didn't actually think about it because, oh, you know, like they are just broader engineers. What is a broader engineer, you know? So this is something that helped in terms of internal mobility. And I think it shifted when we started to look at it because we had hiring external freezes, right? So we were not hiring so much at that moment. And then internal mobility helped us a lot to fill some of those roles, which were like somehow impossible to hire if we weren't thinking external at that time.
Okay, and I mean, for me, it's always a very good idea to say, you know what, we're just gonna hire internally. But the fact is, when someone moves from one point of the organization to another, you still have an open role. It's just another role to backfill. So. And another aspect to this as well that I wanted to mention is how do you balance the needs of the organization, needs of certain project, etc., based on prioritization, but also the desires of the engineers. And I'm asking this because I've seen some cases where you have, let's say, a front-end engineer going into a full stack role. Because it's needed, because someone left in their team. It's not necessarily what they want to do. So how would you suggest to balance kind of this individual desires and organizational needs, especially that, you know, we cannot actually backfill that position, and we have to be very careful about using our resources.
I can address a little bit of the question. There was an exercise done recently on prioritization of roles, and I'll share some of that experience. So I would argue it's probably above a principal's role or a leader role. We need to look a bit higher up. The things that I observed are the following. So we have an organization with, let's say, 4 engineering sub-departments, right? Or 10 engineering teams, you name it. First thing, in my opinion, is to understand at an organizational level which of these teams or departments or domains, however you decide to call them, which of them are on or are priority when it comes to the company's bottom line. So we look at financials, right? Which of these teams have to deliver at what speed, what makes us the most money, right? It's really quite high level, but an organization should be able to provide this information. So the executive or the senior leadership should be able to come up with this information and prioritization. Then we go down, and based on that, we have the situation, as you just explained, Yusuf, that somebody is potentially exiting a team, or somebody just wants to move internally, or whatever the case may be. But understanding where on this priority scale that team sits, we would then be able to make a bit more informed decisions about how we shift resources internally. I'll come back to this in a second. I want to park it and move to the second piece. The same 10 teams, or however you have them split in your organization, one exercise which I would argue all organizations should try and make is skills taxonomy, indexing the skills and capabilities of your individuals. In this case, we're talking about engineers primarily, but having a clear understanding, and it's not so hard, right? Include it in your onboarding. Make an exercise of it in your onboarding. You onboard a new person, here, by the way, let's look at the skill set in this, and this. Let's look also at your strengths. Let's look also at your values. Why not? Having this taxonomy and having this indexed properly will also give you a faster turnaround. So again, going back, we are in the situation where we have priorities per team. This team needs to be completely filled at all times to deliver. This team maybe not so much because they're not delivering a critical product, and we have the skill set over here. So this exercise is probably faster done when we have these two together. Ideal world, right? Let's say. So this is one thing I would suggest that organizations do, and we have to remember that when we shift resources internally. You made a really good point. Yes, there is another seat left empty, but the question is, if this individual who decided to shift internally would have not had the opportunity to shift internally, what are the chances that they would have exited the company altogether? In which case you have 2 empty seats. So there is a thing primarily in finance or in investment, right? Loss harvest. When you are like nearly at a loss, can I salvage anything? Kind of.
Right.
So try to consider that when this is a pushback I have always gotten when it comes to internal hiring. No, because if we can't approach, because, then they are left without someone. Yes, but, their team on a company prioritization list, they're not a critical product. You are a critical product. So poach that person, get that person. You need to deliver, right? These are the things that came to my mind when you asked the question. I think there is a lot more to discuss on the topic.
That's a very strong argument, to be honest. So you mentioned prioritization of roles at the very high level, and then introducing skills taxonomy. That's
prioritization of I think prioritization of teams and domains first and foremost.
Yeah, okay.
Depending on what they deliver, and then yes, I think it comes naturally as a byproduct, right? The prioritization of roles.
So basically what you mean is just to have a very clear idea at the very high level. What does the company need? Where can we afford to poach people or not, right? So that we kind of have some rules of the game before we start going into the skills, figuring it out, etc. Anything you'd like to add, Chris? Maybe also on the bit about keeping the people, right? Or even giving them a smooth transition into this new role.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to Andrea and thinking how companies are so different in terms of like approaching internal people. You know, I think some companies are more sensitive to that than others. And, you know, there is workplaces where this is not possible. So, and this happened in my previous jobs as well, where like this was not happening. But I truly believe in retention and what Andrea said about, you know, as we say, like, well, you know, when you have two birds in one hand, you know, what should you do? And I truly believe that no team owns the talent they have. You know, the talent moves, and this is actually desirable, right? It's desirable that we have someone that took us maybe a long time, a long process to hire, that gets knowledge of different products, different technologies, that is interested in the organization as a whole. I think it's part of actually having a good culture that people are not looking into their single own island, their single team. And I think this happens in big organizations where, you know, you are on your niche, you are on your club, you know, and you love what you do, of course, but when you look outside, like, you do not recognize, for example, what the other teams are doing, what are the skills that they have, because you are actually focusing on your own. So I do see a lot of hiring managers who get a little bit offended when someone wants to leave their teams, which is fine at one hand. It's someone that probably was doing a good job and they want to retain. But at the same time, you know, you have to be your company biggest friend, right? Like, you really need to have a think of this talent sits in the whole company. It doesn't sit in my team. And this is why, and I had like several discussions with departments over the years, that, you know, be careful, for example, in choosing a very specific technology that only your team does, right? If you lose someone, you are in trouble. If someone moves, you are in trouble, you know? So, you know, try to not do that. And as well, think about retention as, how can I make this job attractive on a long term? And don't be afraid of letting people go, because I think there is always a circle. If my team is attractive, if other teams are attractive, people are going to move inside and out of my team. So I will have the chance to bring people internally that are working in payments or in other teams. They are doing technology, for example. They are actually working with GVM technologies or whatever, microservices, but it's just that they are bringing something else. And as I cannot grow my team extensively, you know, because I should have a team of 5 or 7, I actually at a certain point will need to let someone fly so I can get another bird to get in, right? So there is no space for everyone. And this is a very hard thing. I met hiring managers who were super happy to see this because they were very lucky. And I think Andrea said something about this, departments and areas which are more critical. Everyone wants to go to critical teams. Yeah. Everyone is like the thing, right? And let's say no one wants to go to the unattractive teams. And then we have a super big unbalance of internal mobility in those two departments. So we need to work on this. You know, we need to work on attracting people to every area, you know, by explaining them, if this team exists, they are important, because, you know, like, this is not critical, but without this, actually, these many things won't function well, you know? So I really like this internal job posting thing, because you can explain that, you know, without my team, this and this and this product would not work, you know, and they would be like, oh yeah, I work with this. This is cool, you know? So I think retention for me is key. And not being like, always thinking about like movement, you know, and not thinking about your own island, but actually everything around you. So this is how I see it in a way.
Yeah, having a kind of an abundance mindset. If you grow someone in your team, then you expect other people to grow theirs, and then when there is movement, you can sometimes lose, sometimes win, but overall the company wins. So that's a very interesting way to see it. I will keep this in mind. Talent moves. That's for me, like, that's a title. I love it. Talent will always move. You just have to kind of adapt to it rather than try to stop it. So whether they move internally, like Andrea said, or they move externally, it's your choice, right? Either you allow them to move internally, or you decide to let them go. So I have other questions. I would love to ask mine, but we have a audience here, and we would love to give them also their chance. So I will go through some of the questions we've received. The first one is from Kumar. He's asking, do you believe that asynchronous video interviews are effective in maintaining a focus on skill-based hiring for both technical and non-technical positions? If yes, then how? If no, then why? Like the little emoji at the end. That was a smile. Knowing that the question is difficult. So who wants to take this?
Yeah, I can start maybe. I'm not a big fan of these interviews, to be very honest with you. I don't like the idea of recorded interviews, if this is what Kumar means. Although I understand the concept of it, and I actually already had some touch on this type of things before. Like, of course, because when you are trying to explore solutions, you always explore everything, and then you decide what you want to do or not. But in my view, I think the best quality interviews are the ones that you are able to ask follow-up questions. And even when we are talking about skill-based, right? And I think, like, a lot of us get a lot of good answers from examples, from follow-up questions. So when you have a recorded interview, at the end of the day, what you get is what was answered, by that person. That's it. And we know that an interview is a conversation, right? And when the other person is a recorded video, right, which asks a very specific question, and then you don't get to, get a follow-up, or to get like, okay, but can you tell me about a time, or can you tell me a specific situation, or when the situation happened, how did you react? I think it gets a little bit insufficient in my view, but I'm going to be very honest with Kumar. I never experienced this in companies I worked. So maybe in some it works really well in a way. As well, it saves time of recruitment. So in that regard, if companies are struggling or they have a very small team, maybe yes, maybe that's going to be worth it. Although someone has to listen to that, so they have to sit and listen. So it's again like maybe 30 minutes waste of listening instead of being in the interview. But I don't think it's the way somehow. I feel like, yeah, technology is there for giving us like the right tools, but I don't see how that can help us so much. Let's say, Andrea, I don't know if you had experience with it before, or
these tools that you use to have pre-recorded interviews. No, I have not. If that is the question, I read the question slightly differently. I thought of using tools such as Codility, for example, or using these tests, especially in the technical side of things, or case studies, for example, for non-technical, to which individuals have to submit some responses. And if that is the case, the way I thought about it is that, I mean, now with generative AI or generally AI, you can kind of solve things arguably quite easily. I don't see that as a problem. I don't think that is cheating. I think if an individual knows where to look to find a solution, happy days, right? We don't have to memorize everything. However, we would need to pair that exercise, the async version, with a live version in which there is the human touch and understanding of how the individual thought about solving a specific problem, topic, whatever the topic is. So that's the only thing I would add. If that was the version of the question, is I would see them both and not having just one one of them, right? Just the asynchronous one.
Yeah, I can add a plus to that, because now thinking about, for example, Codility, which I used for many years, that's excellent, let's say, in terms of being able to, let's do a first big screen, of, is this person, for example, meeting the minimum requirements? And I did listen to this talk with the CTO of Codility as well. Andre, you were there as well. Where he explained as well, like how we need to shift the questions that we are asking in those tests. Because of course, when you are asking for definitions and very easy searchable questions, of course, like then you are actually not using the tool to its max potential, especially with AI right now. But Codility is a good example, but there are many others. I would say when we are talking about non-tech roles, probably comes trouble, right? Like, I don't know how this works in the non-tech world, but I give a plus to you on, like, yeah, we just need to have maybe a second life part plus something when it comes to tech, at least. I totally agree with you.
All right. So let's move on to the next one. How to convince hiring managers to not hire for too specific of a profile. I feel that TA are quite convinced, but hiring managers are often hard to convince. So it's kind of like touching on a very topical question, like how do you kind of convince the hiring manager to broaden the search and not to look for something too specific?
I can start, because I was exactly thinking about this yesterday, because I had this very interesting moment when I was hiring for this principal engineering. It was a very specific profile, to the point that I could not find anyone for a very long time. And what I was told by the hiring manager was, no, Chris, like, it's niche, but there is talent there. And somehow you believe it, like, because the hiring manager is saying, I'm not an engineer, and you start convincing yourself that you are just not able to find the right person. And, like, one day I was drinking a coffee with an executive principal, and I told him, like, this is happening to me. And I'm really, struggling to understand why am I making this mistake? And he told me, okay, let's do a meeting, the three of us. He was more senior. He was in a completely different area. And he said, okay, let's, like, the three of us, like, be together. And, I was kind of looking from, like, how they were talking, right? Because I think the discussion was very tech driven. So after like 5 minutes of the hiring manager explaining the profile, the executive principal looked at us and said, the role doesn't exist outside of this company. There is no one who has the skill set, I can guarantee you. And it was a shock of the hiring manager, like, what? And he said, no, do you know why? Because that profile is sitting in this meeting room. It's you. So it's just like sometimes you have to bring the right people to the room, and to bring a completely different perspective, And I just brought someone from the outside because I had a coffee, but I kind of learned with that, because then I started to talk to people more often about these things that were happening to me in recruitment, So, and then when I spoke about this to the SVP, because I had to justify why we were hiring this role for 12 months, right? I sat with the SVP, and the first thing that they told me was, close the role. We need to rethink about this. This is not possible. Like, we cannot hire at this moment. And the reality is that we completely changed that profile, and we completely changed the way of hiring for that team. And let's say we hired someone with amazing characteristics that had to learn on the job, but again, bringing someone external was really good, and sometimes, it's not enough that TA is convinced, and we know that. And the hiring manager as well, sometimes they are not even convinced about what they are doing, but they have to follow. So when you are running too fast in your job and you really need something, sometimes you don't think. So bringing an external person was really important for me. So let's say bringing someone from technology, someone who really is senior enough to be able to listen and to give feedback, So it was a funny moment for all of us, not maybe for the hiring manager, but at least I had some pleasure in being there, listening to this conversation.
That's a very nice kind of trick and hack. I'm sure you would have liked to know that before. Wasting 12 months.
Took me only 12 months.
You came in to listen and you just saved yourself 12 months. Congratulations,
Exactly.
Anyone that listens. All right, so next question from Marisa. Do you believe that skill-based hiring is a universally applicable approach to the hiring process? If so, how can we adapt the tests to be more inclusive and accessible to individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds around the world? Andrea, maybe?
I can take that if, as a start. And I see there is a second question following up. If there are any biases or concern for test-based hiring. I think they're excellent and very deep questions, and they go to the root of how do we ensure equitable processes for everyone? My short answer would be probably not. I don't think that they are universally applicable. But what I mean by universally, I mean profile-based. So I'm not referring to a location or anything like that, but the profile-based. There are profiles which I believe could be easily assessed with this approach, and I believe there are profiles which are potentially more easily assessed with different approaches. However, we are in tech. We are talking about tech. So if that is the case, then most likely we would benefit for sure from having quite a thorough skill-based approach. So going back to the original question. Now, dependent on the kind of tests, right? If the tests that Marisa is referring to here are tests such as the codility tests or the tests that companies develop, maybe the question mark is how do we deliver these tests? Because I believe that sometimes we have different cultural backgrounds, we have different nationalities, ethnicities, gender. The diversity is tremendous, right? And every individual perceives the receipt of a test in a potentially different way. So maybe it's not about do we have the tests or not, because the tests are there or should be there to ensure equality and to ensure a level, but maybe it is about how do we administer the tests, right? And if we have a test and we know for sure that the answers to the 3 questions have to be A, B, and C, this ensures efficiency if we do them fast, and ensures predictability, and ensures that we make the correct decisions, right? If there is no other potential answer possible. However, if we administer these tests without taking into account the way they are being received by our candidates, then we might fall on the other side, and we may alienate our candidates, and they may feel obstructed, they may feel under pressure, they may not deliver from pure anxiety or whatever it may be. So maybe adding to keeping the tests, ensuring that the process is stable and it is the same for everyone. However, being mindful of the way we present the existence of these tests, and being mindful of the way that we administer them in order to take into account what Marisa was mentioning, right? Backgrounds and diverse approaches to tests. I think that is the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I mean, we also discussed in the very beginning of the talk the idea that the whole premise of skill-based hiring is to not look at the background of the person, but to look at the skills, and that by itself already kind of nudges the recruiter and the hiring manager to look beyond what the person is or what their background is, and look at more skills. So that's also something that we mentioned earlier. Laura is asking, do you think we will need less recruiters if we move towards skill-based hiring, for which we can use platforms and recruitment coordinators? And for example, recruitment coordinators would coordinate the whole recruitment process otherwise. So I guess, like, will we still need recruiters if we move towards more skill-based hiring?
Yeah,
anyone?
I can have a look at that. So I was reading the question and thinking about, like, we continue and will continue to be the specialists in recruitment. So I think, we are specialists in assessing, and assessing skills will be always part of TA. Now, if you ask me if we are going to move towards maybe less recruitment, I think yes, in the next years, probably we will have less people working in TA, just because we will need to convince them again that TA is important, but that's another topic. But in general, I do think that translating those tasks and needs for the role is still a big part of our job as recruiters, and to ask the right questions in order to evaluate those skills. So I think it would be a big mistake to have, let's say, a coordination team, just, let's say, splitting the interviews between hiring manager and interviewers and excluding the assessment of recruitment. What I think, and this is something that I have been noticing is it needs to improve, is that actually recruiters become specialists in the areas they are hiring for. You don't need to be an engineer to hire for engineers, but you definitely need to deep dive into what questions are meaningful, So if you are someone who spends 15 minutes asking for notice period, salary, your motivation, and you think this is your interview, yes, probably you will not be needed in the future because someone else can ask those questions. Now, if you want to be part, if you want to take part of these skill-based questions, then I think, yes, you will always be part, and you will be a key part. And I strongly believe that companies will very much appreciate the skills that we own on that regard. And let's not forget that we don't only evaluate, we negotiate and many other things, right? So in that regard, I don't see how we will need less recruiters. I would think we will need less recruiters for other reasons, let's say.
Okay, I love this answer for many reasons, but mainly because I know I will still have a job, 5 years down the line.
Fingers crossed.
I mean, TA has changed so much in the past 2-3 years, and it will continue to evolve like any other job. And it's evolving in the kind of right direction. I love what you said about becoming experts in their field. So you can see that there are more tech recruiters. Tech specialized recruiter doesn't mean that they only do tech roles, but it means that they understand what developers do, what it takes to run an engineering department, etc. So they become specialists, and you can kind of think about this for other roles as well. Every role is evolving, and you kind of have to adapt to it, right? So thank you very much for that answer. Kayla is asking, what is the best way to ensure equitable evaluation of candidates who move through a technical round of interviews and avoid technical interviewer bias? Are there any resources you could recommend for building up those systems and resources? I will have to take this one. You can you can try Codility. I mean, you're asking for a technical round of interviews, I 100% recommend using Codility, because what it does is you can literally like not look at their CV if you want, and just send them a basic technical round, and you can look at their code before you even look at their profile if bias is something you want to completely avoid. And then you can also use Code Live, which is another product, and kind of collaborate with them on something specific. And you can ask kind of the same questions, use the same methods in order to avoid bias. Of course, you cannot completely avoid bias, because bias is human, and it's somewhere there will be bias, but you can greatly reduce it by having this kind of same level of same evaluations for everyone. So that kind of hopefully answers the question. And yeah, you can definitely book a demo. I'll be happy to explain as well myself. What is your strategy? So let's see. Okay, so what is your strategy for dealing with candidates who do not agree with test-based hiring and refuse to participate in the assessments? That's a very interesting question. Anyone who wants to take? By the way, we only have 4 minutes left, so a quick answer would be much appreciated.
Quick. I have the feeling I tried to answer Marisa's questions, and I will connect it with the other question she asked in relation to skill-based hiring, only for tech, but also for non-tech. This is a tech conversation, so we are primarily talking about tech, but the industry shifts towards skill-based hiring regardless of the role and regardless of the domain. I mean, that's where we are trying to move towards. Let's see how much we can achieve. And to the original question, this happens a lot when candidates are refusing to participate in interview processes due to having tests. Now, a few things. There are companies who will be able to afford, after a while, to say, okay, we just do not progress with the candidate. There are companies who cannot afford that. The best thing that you can do is have a really strong candidate experience happening. So make sure that from the very, very beginning of your interaction with these individuals, you make it extremely transparent that this is going to happen, and have rock solid explanations behind why this is happening. So explain the reason behind your company deciding for testing, explain how they will be assessed, who will assess them, and so on and so forth. And then on the internal side of things, you would also need to try and negotiate for some flexibility. There will be instances where individuals have, like neurodivergent candidates, for example, they have legitimate reasons for being in severe anxiety or whatever other things that may be going on when asked to complete such tests. So you will have to negotiate internally with your organization and with your hiring managers and with your engineering teams and what's so not, to try and find alternatives for such niche or such rare exceptions. What can we do in that case? How can we administer the same test to an individual with maybe special requirements and still keep equality in the recruitment process, right? And getting them on board and having alternative solutions for rare exceptions. So 2 things: externally, ensure that you make things extremely transparent, and help them prepare for the tests, right? It's not a boogeyman. It shouldn't be the boogeyman anymore. And on the internal side, you also have situations where you should negotiate for potential exceptions for real cases where we should be paying really close attention to diversity and to this, especially the neurodiversity I'm talking about here. I hope I'm good in time.
Yeah, no,
Chris, would you add anything?
That was a very good answer. Yes, please, Chris. Anything to add or?
No, I was just checking the last question as well about how we keep and handle to keep open roles. I think this fear of missing good candidates is always something that we get, because hiring managers have this idea that a role open is something that is always rolling, and receiving candidates is great. But I usually like to tell them, hey, let's keep like 3-4 days with our role open internally first. Let's find out who is attracted. Let's publicize. Let's attract this talent. And then once we know how internal talent looks like for us, then we can post it external. So we decided to start these rules in order to have internal coming first and to attract internal candidates first. So they are, let's say, the primary reason why we are hiring in that sense. And then getting the externals, and this has been happening. So it was a negotiation thing. You have to negotiate with them.
Do we still have time for an addition to that?
Yes, please go ahead.
The way I read the question and I thought of answering, I thought of situations where companies cannot hire. And the mention there was in relation to consulting, right? I mean, you don't need the person now. Why would you hire them right now? And I would advise to look at the financials. So the prioritization that I was referring to before also can apply here, looking at the company's bottom line. So at the end of the day, any organization needs to make money. And there will be products or teams who will be primarily responsible for this. So looking at those teams and using that as your influencing tactic, right? So discussing, okay, but we don't hire right away. However, this team needs to deliver this by then, and this is in the company's OKR or strategic alignment for the next 6 to 12 months. And this is what you can use to your advantage. Similarly, you can argue that you can hire potentially in a different team. Maybe this is not your team, which is the priority, but maybe there is one. Maybe you can find and hire that individual there with the view of shifting them later on. So what I would let's say advise is to always think at the bottom line, right? Company's bottom line, and try to use that to influence decision making with senior leadership or with leadership in general.
All right. I wish we had more time, to be honest. But we've come to the end of this webinar. I hope that you guys, you're still listening, got something out of it. I definitely made a lot of notes and will implement some of these things we've discussed. I'd like to thank you very much, guys, for doing this. You have quite a lot of experience, and I really love that you are very strong advocates of TA as an evolving function, as a partnering function that can evolve with the business. And yeah, I mean, these are topics that will definitely add a lot of value to companies, and they will need to start thinking about these things because people are the most valuable resources, especially if we're talking about the tech industry, right? So managing these things is of great importance. We've added our LinkedIn profiles as well. If you guys have any questions, please connect with us. You can also look at our posts and follow us. Do you guys have any email addresses or anything that you want to offer? Do you offer consultations or
mentoring? For me, everything is on my profile, really. My LinkedIn feels like a ginormous business card.
You don't even remember what you do. All the things.
I do because I use it every day, so it keeps reminding me of what I do every day.
Right.
Same. I mean, LinkedIn works perfectly. So if you have any questions, if you want to connect, I'm super happy to connect over there, and to maybe have a separate session if it's needed to any questions that they might have.
Excellent. All right. Then wish you a great day, guys, and thank you for joining. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Bye.